Okay, today on Sewing with Cyril, we are sewing the Jennie T. The first thing we're going to do is take all the contents out of the bag. So in your kit, it'll come with the instruction booklet, the back bodice, the front bodice, the collar, the content tag, and the back label. On the sides of the fabric that have the stickers, this will mark the wrong side. At the sleeve, you'll see notches. These are our points of actions where we'll fold later on. The back has a shallow neckline and the front has a deeper neckline. Before we begin sewing, you'll load up your sewing machine with the given thread. Taking our fabric from the outside of the bag, we'll test our tension and adjust to sewing this fabric. Our stitches should look even and uniform, not pulling or too loose on the fabric. If it looks like this, you're on the right track. Step 1. Take your back bodice and your front bodice. Lay the back bodice sticker side down and your front bodice sticker side up on top. From here we will line up the shoulders, making sure the raw edges are evenly meeting each other at these points. We will now begin sewing the shoulders together at 3/8, not forgetting to back tack at the beginning and the end. Here, you'll be keeping a slight tension on the fabric at all times, a slight little pull, not too much, not too little, to keep that stretch in the fabric. As we finish off, back tacking. After we finish sewing, making sure to trim all threads at the front and the back. Your shoulder should now be attached with a straight, even stitch line. And then you can repeat this exact same process on the other side, making sure to back tack and have a little bit of tension as you sew. You will now have both of your shoulders, front and back, attached. So we have 1 and 2. So now that we have the shoulders done, we're going to take it and attach at the side seams, keeping the shirt wrong side out, stickers outside. The first thing you're going to do is line up the raw edges of the front and the back. We're going to do that to this side and the other side. Lining it up with your 3/8 mark, lower the needle and back tack, sewing all the way through. As we approach the armhole curve, you'll just want to stay close to your guide as tight as possible to that 3/8 mark and slowly curve the seam around. You'll see I'm lining it up right here and staying nice and tight to it. Slowly maneuvering around. So now that this side is done, we will be moving on to this side. As you've seen before, we're going to start from the straight side of the fabric so that as we approach the armhole curve, we can slowly maneuver that turn. Making sure once again we're always pulling that little bit of tension on the fabric. Again, we're just pivoting the fabric to line up with the 3/8 mark. Right now we have the shoulders done, the side seams done, and we have the stickers wrong side out. Now we're going to take the collar labeled 42. So what we're going to do is lay that flat with sticker side down. Fold the short ends together and we're going to sew along this edge. Taking it to the sewing machine, we'll sew it at 3/8. Once again, keep trimming those threads. Your collar should now be in a circle. And now we know that the wrong side of the collar is where the two raw edges face. Keeping this in mind, we can now remove the sticker. Now turning the collar right side out so that the seam faces in. Now taking that seam, pressing it in half with your fingers and folding it seam to seam so that it lines up right along the middle there. From here, we'll bring the raw edges together all the way around, and then it should be completely in half. As we can see, the t-shirt is wrong side out because the sticker is on the outside, so we're just going to flip that right side out. Lay the shirt so that the front collar is facing us, the deeper side towards us, and the shallower side on the table. So we're going to take the collar and line up that seam with the wearer's left side shoulder. So if I were wearing this, this would be my left side. Take your collar that is now in half and attach the raw edge to the t-shirt's raw edge. Matching up the collar seam with the wearer's left side collar seam that we just talked about. If you're not using pins to keep this in place, you can take it to your sewing machine and do there. Don't worry if the collar's a little bit smaller than the neckline, that's completely okay. We'll be doing that stretch as we go. Once again, making sure the seam is flat open, matching up the two sides, and matching that up at the shoulder. So spread the shoulder seam open, matching up the shoulder seam with the collar seam. Now that we have this in the machine, we'll make sure all those raw edges of the shirt and collar are facing one direction. As we sew, we'll be pulling the collar, not the shirt, as we sew to match up. Once again, sewing this at 3/8 and lining up all the way through. As we get to the shoulder points, just splitting those seams open so everything lays flat. As we sew, we'll take our time and make sure these raw edges are lining up all the way through. As you can see, I'm adjusting as I go. If it feels like it's getting a little tight, no worries, just keep tension on that collar. As you approach the end, the 3/8 mark should line up with where you began. So now your t-shirt should look like this, with the collar attached all the way around the neckline. Moving on to the sleeve, you'll see on the inside of the fabric, there are 2 notches on the seam. As you can see, we have 1 and 2. As a good rule of thumb, we're going to push the seam allowance towards the back of the armhole and fold at that first notch, making sure the seams are aligned with each other, and then fold at the second notch. At the bottom of the armhole, we'll push the seam allowance to the back of the armhole once again, and roll that edge 3/8 on top of 3/8. Pinch both edges, straighten out so that it looks like a tapered cuff. Do this on both sides. To sew this together, we'll do a tack line on that seam and that seam, top and bottom, and you'll find the middle of the cuff and do that on the very edge as well. The tack on the middle of the cuff will be done front and back. Now taking our shirt to the machine, we'll make sure those rolls are once again complete, 3/8, 3/8, lining up the seams and sewing in the middle of that seam. We call this a stitch in the ditch. As you put it under, you'll put your needle between that seam and tack. As you can see, it blends in perfectly with our previous seam line. Once again for the top, making sure the seam allowance is towards the back, lining up the seams, folding at the first notch, and folding at the second notch. Sliding our fabric under, putting that needle in the seam, and stitching in the ditch. Reminder to keep trimming our threads, and you can see it blends right in. We'll now repeat this on the other cuff, folding 3/8, 3/8 at the bottom, lining up that seam. Making sure our seam allowance is pressed to the back, folding at the first notch and the second notch. That seam allowance should be flat underneath as well. Now with the cuff, we'll make sure that that hem is rolled in there nice and flat. Finding the mid of that arm cuff, we'll put it under our machine and tack 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch on the edge. That's what it'll look like. Repeat on the other side. Finish the cuffs by doing this on the front and back of both. Our t-shirt is now complete. You'll see the neckline is attached and the hem of the cuffs are finished. Turn the t-shirt once again inside out, sticker side out. Mine just happened to fall off. We're now going to take our hem and on the side seam, folding that seam in half and rolling 1 inch all around. We will be stitching at the very edge. Flipping our hem on the inside, making sure our seam is pressed open. Making sure to line up those seam lines. From here, stitch 1/8 from the edge all the way around. Reminder to keep that tension as we're sewing. Now we will attach the tag, making sure both ends on the inside are flipped in. Attaching to the back the one that's higher as opposed to the one that's lower. To find the midpoint, line up those seams, pull through, and that will be your middle. So once you have that, we'll take our tag and line it up in the middle. Line up this tag on top of the seam allowance. With the seam allowance pressed down, have the tag on top and lower your needle 1/8 from the edge of the tag. And now lower your foot. Repeat the same step on the other side. Now your tag is attached at center back. The last thing we have to sew on is our content tag. We're going to take it, fold it in half, short sides together. On the wearer's left side of the shirt, just like how we attached the collar, we're going to attach the content care label about 3 inches from the bottom hem on the inside of the shirt. So on the inside of that shirt hem, a couple inches up, we'll take that tag, fold it in half. Here we're going to sandwich it right between the seam. To attach the tag, once it's sandwiched between the seam allowance, we'll sew right on top of the seam allowance. After you finish putting on the tag, you'll see the little message for you. I made this right here where I am. To finish the t-shirt, we're going to iron it, pressing the collar, the cuffs, and the hem. Making sure the seam allowance is pressed down and generally ironing the shirt so that it is crispy and clean. And your Jennie t-shirt is now complete. We hope you enjoyed sewing with Zero, and we'll see you on our next project.